Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Brice D. Smith. I recently published this book, Lou Sullivan, Daring to be a Man Among Men, through Transgress Press. See, that's me on the back. So, who is Lou Sullivan? He was born in Milwaukee in 1951 and named Sheila Jean Sullivan. Lou was the third of 6 children and grew up in the suburb of Wauwatosa, where he attended private Catholic schools. As a teenager, Lou marched for civil rights and joined the 1960s counterculture. Lou came of age in the gay liberation movement in Milwaukee, moved to San Francisco in 1975 as part of the Great Gay Migration, and spent years struggling to transition because gay trans men supposedly did not exist. Lou dedicated his life to helping other trans men, founded an international F2M community, and helped start the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco. Lou died 3 months before his 40th birthday from AIDS complications. Far too young by our standards, as I write in the book. But Lou was at peace when he died, because he felt that he had accomplished everything that he set out to do. By the time that he died, Lou had published 2 books, transformed gender professionals' understanding of F2M gender identity and sexuality, organized F2M individuals around the world into a community, and helped start the modern-day trans movement. Perhaps most importantly, Lou inspired everyone who knew or knew of him to live their lives fully and authentically. I first learned about Lou Sullivan back in 2004. I had taken a history course on a whim, and the course was Gender in American History. Now, at the time, I was just starting to kind of question my own gender identity, and I decided what better way to maybe get in touch with who I am than to do a project on transgender history. When I went to the library at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and checked the shelves for books, there were maybe 3 feet of shelf space, or there was maybe 3 feet of shelf space that had anything to do with trans people whatsoever in any capacity. And it seemed that fully 1/3 of all of those books referenced this guy, Lou Sullivan, and just how inspirational he had been, what a key figure he was in transgender history. And I felt like I just couldn't learn enough about him. His story had this really visceral effect on me, and I got frustrated that I couldn't find more information. He didn't have a biography or a memoir. As I mentioned in the book, actually, publishing his journals was one life goal that Lou set for himself that he failed to meet. It was likely a combination of Lou's lifelong struggles with insecurity, the consciousness of his fallibility, his historian's bent, and his aversion to sensationalism that prevented Lou from publishing his journals before he died, despite the encouragement he received from others. But there was also the important role that death itself plays in one's life story. And while he lived, there remained events, thoughts, and experiences for Lou to document. I was so frustrated that Lou's memoir or Lou's biography didn't exist that I decided, okay, well then, I guess I need to write it. So I enrolled in UWM's brand new PhD program to get my PhD in history and work on writing a biography worthy of this tremendous man. Transcribing his journals helped me to figure out my identity as a trans man, and his story gave me the courage to transition as well. There was one summer night when I was transcribing them, sitting there at my computer, I came across a line in his journals, and he was actually retelling a letter that he had written to his then boyfriend, or then ex-boyfriend, explaining that if he were lying on his deathbed, transitioning would be one thing that he regretted not doing. And my body just got covered with goosebumps, and I had asked myself, well, if I were lying on my deathbed, would I regret not transitioning? And the answer was overwhelmingly yes. Then the second question that Lou helped me to ask myself was, if he could do it, if this guy who identified as a gay trans man at a time when gay trans men supposedly didn't exist, what was my problem? Living in the 21st century, why could I not transition? I wanted to write Lou's biography because he not only inspired me and helped me to transition, but he had done so throughout his entire life while he lived. And if he could continue to inspire all these years after his death, I knew that he could continue to make a difference in our community. Also, our history needs to be told. We've been forgotten from history, and Lou's story helps us to reclaim a very important part not only of trans history, but also broader LGBT history and American history beyond that. Now, Lou understood well the importance of history. For Lou, the realization that others like him had existed throughout history had done a lot to validate his identity and alleviate his sense of isolation, and he was excited for the opportunity to help bring other FDMs to this same realization. Lou illustrated the importance of history time and again in many of his publications, in his FDM newsletter, and the books that he published. And here is one instance in which he really talked about the importance of history. It was an issue of the FDM newsletter where he had on the front cover the recently deceased jazz musician Billy Tipton. Now, Tipton had lived for 50 years as a man, and Lou identified Tipton as one of our grandfathers. And here's what he told his readers. Sometimes we neglect to remember the many FDMs who have done or are doing it on their own. Tipton lived in a time when there were no gender counselors, no doctors to prescribe hormones, no surgeons to perform chest or genital surgery. If you wanted to live as a man, you just had to make do with what you had. We owe a tribute of thanks to him for living the way he felt most comfortable, having the wisdom to understand what he had to do and doing it. Men like Billy Tipton proved that we, as FDMs, are not a bizarre recent phenomenon. That throughout history there have been females who knew deep down that they were men and did whatever they had to do to live their lives honestly. Lou was well aware of the difficulties of identifying as living as an FDM in the 1980s, but he believed that historical perspective enabled one to recognize the benefits of the present. Also, through his coverage of Tipton, Lou implied that FDMs had a history, which was a very important notion for an identity-based community. Lou was a part of Milwaukee's GPU in the early to mid-1970s, and he was welcomed in this organization with open arms at a time when he identified as a female transvestite, because there just wasn't another identity category available to him. But he was welcomed with open arms, and it was here in Milwaukee's GPU that Lou acquired the valuable skills that he would need to become the organizer and activist and scholar that he was to become. He learned the nuts and bolts of how to organize a meeting, how to network with other organizations and people all around the country, how to publish a newsletter too, and perhaps most importantly, how to mentor other people in the community. I would say too, one of the other very, very important things that Lou gained from his time in Milwaukee's GPU was the notion of a term being all-inclusive. Now, in the case of Milwaukee, and specifically Milwaukee's Gay People's Union, the term was gay. Gay was meant to be all-inclusive. It included gays, lesbians, bisexuals, transvestites, and transsexuals, which were the terms at the time that were used. Keep in mind, this was before transgender really came onto the scene, and way before trans was the preferred term. But Lou, in understanding gay as an all-inclusive term, Lou in his later years would come to use F to M as an all-inclusive term to encompass everyone across the transmasculine spectrum. Now, he was never one to really differentiate and exclude people based upon where they were, whether in their transition or in their gender identity in general. He felt like everybody along the transmasculine spectrum should fall within the category of F to M. In GPU, folks not only accepted trans people like Lou, but they, quote, felt like gays had a lot to learn from far-out cases like ours. That's what Lou said about GPU. Lou was not only welcomed in Milwaukee's GPU or in the activist community, but in the gay bars as well. After a few drinks at the bar, Lou let my fantasies take over so much I was shocked they weren't a reality. In the bars, dressed in his leather jacket, Lou was no longer Sheila, the female transvestite, but Lou. He would check out men with his friend Charles, talk to friends from GPU, flirt and dance with drag queens and gay men, and was occasionally successful at picking up men. However, despite the joys of sleeping with gay men, at times Lou would become depressed and feel guilty, thinking, I would have to make boys be heterosexual to have sex with them. Nothing made Lou feel more like a man than having sex with a gay man. For gay men were attracted to other men, and betting gay men validated his gender identity. Lou was concerned that having sex with gay men could only be rendered heterosexual due to his female genitalia. Romantic and sexual partners are in a powerful position to shape and validate our identities because of the ways in which they touch our psyches and our bodies. After transitioning, Lou fell in love with a beautiful 20-year-old bisexual man named Keith. Here's a bit about Lou's relationship with Keith and what it meant to him. Lou was overwhelmed how good sex is with someone I love so much. He marveled at how, with Keith, I am there when I have sex. I am not fantasizing about men together or of some other sex scene. I am feeling my body against his. I am feeling his hands touching me. I am excited as I look at him as he looks at me. Such feelings I've never known. He always refers to me in the masculine, and there is no doubt we are two men who love each other. Keith gave Lou a sense of being part of the world that Lou had, quote, never experienced before. I feel like a whole and worthy, fine, and important person. He loves me. I am learning to love in the way that I always wanted to love someone. Sadly, that relationship couldn't withstand the challenges of being in a trans and gay relationship. Keith loved Lou just the way that he was, but worried what others thought about their relationship. Lou loved that others saw them as being in a gay relationship, but increasingly worried that Keith could not see him as a man unless Lou underwent genital reconstructive surgery. Eventually, they parted ways. And 3 weeks after moving out of the home that they shared for 5 years, Lou wound up in the hospital with pneumonia and was diagnosed as having AIDS. He never fell in love again. It was his work on behalf of FDMs that gave meaning to Lou's life. This work made him want to live, and he did so for an astonishing 4 years after his AIDS diagnosis, 3 years longer than statistics at the time said he should. After his relationship with Keith ended, sex and romantic relationships took a back seat to Lou's FDM activism. He poured all of his heart and soul into creating a world where FDMs could be their authentic selves. In private, Lou struggled with his AIDS diagnosis, but in public he bent it to his will. In the eyes of gender professionals, Lou's AIDS diagnosis gave him gravitas, for AIDS was considered a gay disease. And Lou's AIDS diagnosis gave him an almost superhuman drive and focus when it came to FDM advocacy, organizing, and scholarship. In just 4 short years, Lou accomplished more than most activists do in a lifetime. Initially, when Lou was diagnosed as having AIDS, he felt like his body was just betraying him again. He struggled for a bit, but then impressively, very quickly, focused on the bright side. As he saw it, the bright side to this bleak situation was that Lou was dying from what was then seen as the gay men's disease. And here is what Lou wrote in his first journal entry after receiving his AIDS diagnosis. It really hasn't hit me that I'm about to die. I see the grief around me, but inside I feel serene and a certain kind of peace. My whole life I've wanted to be a gay man, and it's kind of an honor to die from the gay men's disease. The gender programs decided that I couldn't live as a gay man, but I'm going to die like one. In his correspondence, publications in the gay and trans presses, lectures, interviews, conversations with other FDMs, anytime he spoke about his identity after being diagnosed with AIDS, Lou would repeat derivations of that final sentence. The gender programs decided that I couldn't live as a gay man, but I'm going to die like one. Now, when Lou first started pursuing transitioning or physical transitioning, it was at the height of the university-based gender programs. So when Lou moved out to San Francisco, he began applying to the Stanford University Gender Dysphoria program. And Lou actually applied to this program 3 times and was rejected all 3 times. Now, they didn't come out and explicitly state in the letters that they sent him that they were denying him admittance because he identified as a gay man. But off the record, it was apparent that this was why they would not accept them or accept him. Basically, an important thing to understand is that these gender professionals in the programs were pioneers. They really were trying to do good and to help trans people. But there was definitely a need to try and really make the diagnosis and treatment of trans people a valid endeavor. And so these surgeons and therapists and endocrinologists associated with the university programs established these gender programs to try and help trans people. They were seen as pretty out there, I would think, by their colleagues. I mean, who would want to dedicate their careers to helping such a marginalized population? So as they were establishing diagnostic criteria and basically deciding who could be allowed into the programs and who would not, one of the things that they had to consider is, they really wanted to make sure that no one regretted transitioning. They wanted to have, if possible, a 100% success rate. And unfortunately, they ended up then creating some cookie-cutter trans people, many trans folks who looked the same, acted the same. And trans people, what we needed to do in order to access these services was to tell these doctors what they wanted to hear. So, trans people would go in, they knew that they needed to tell these therapists and doctors that they were heterosexual, and in doing so, then they'd be able to access the services. Because, the folks, the doctors or the gender professionals, they really saw themselves as saving trans people from having to lead gay lives. And along comes this guy, Lou Sullivan, saying, hey, I want to transition because I'm a gay man. As they saw it, why would he want to go through all of this to be with men when he could already be with men as a woman? What they didn't understand is, how different it is to be a man among men. When you are a man yourself, it's a very, very different experience being a woman with a man than being a man with a man. And so, Lou kept applying to these programs. Again, as I said earlier, 3 times he applied, and all 3 times they turned him down. Luckily for Lou, he was right on the cusp of a really important change that was occurring in the diagnosis and treatment of trans people. Right around the time that he was really, really ready to begin physically transitioning. That was when the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association, which was a precursor to WPATH, that was when they implemented their standards of care. Now, the way of thinking behind the standards of care was, to have basically uniform diagnostic criteria and treatment too, to basically get everybody on the same page. But what was so helpful about that for trans people, and particularly gay trans men like Lou, is these standards of care enabled him to see a therapist and to see a surgeon and an endocrinologist, all of whom are not affiliated with these university-based programs. So it was through these folks that Lou was then able to begin physically transitioning. And by the time that Lou was diagnosed as having AIDS, he'd gone through 9 years of being denied services from these university-based programs and from the gender professionals as a whole as part of this field of gender dysphoria. Go figure, after Lou's AIDS diagnosis, gender professionals suddenly found Lou's story highly compelling. And not only compelling, but also they believed it. Whereas before, they hadn't believed him so much identifying as a gay man nor wanted to help him transition. But now that he was seen as having the gay men's disease, suddenly they were willing to listen. And as a result, the gender professionals came to understand the relationship between gender identity and sexual orientation, or the lack thereof, because of Lou's compelling, heart-wrenching story. Lou Sullivan is the first F to M to be diagnosed as having AIDS, and the first F to M to have died from AIDS. He was asked in his later years if he had any regrets about transitioning. And here's what Lou had to say about that. He had asked himself this very question one summer afternoon, sitting in the Castro bar, Moby's Dick, surrounded by young, lean, smiling boys. I've come all this way, gone through this whole change. Now what? My future compressed into a shortened time slot. Most dead in 2 years. Some live for 5. What have I been striving toward? Oh, to be normal. To be a mere victim of my lust instead of having orchestrated my desires, my place here. Yet it's been worth all the years just to be in this bar, here, now, with AIDS, and to be a man among men. Not to have to wonder if they think I'm a female. That I know is no longer an issue. To be included, however voyeuristically, however theoretically, in the society of men who can only openly proclaim their ardor for other men, as those within this bar. I have gladly endured these years and these trials. It may be the love that dare not speak its name, but it is surely the love that endures, that persists against all condemnation, even through the threat of death, of AIDS, a love that cannot die. To me, this is the only real love. No, I have never regretted changing my sex, even for a second, despite my AIDS diagnosis, and in some twisted way feel that my condition is proof that I really attained my goal of being a gay man. Even to the finish, I am with my gay brothers. Thank you very much. If you would like to purchase a copy of Lou Sullivan, Daring to Be a Man Among Men, please go to transgresspress.org. And if you would like to purchase an autographed copy, I would be more than happy to sign a copy for you. Just shoot me an email at loubiographer@gmail.com. Thank you so much for this opportunity and for your interest in Lou Sullivan.